They're gaslighting you, and then they're diagnosing you. Yes, we are asking questions. No, we are not akin to people that watch pornography all day. And no, we're not getting high on it. We're going to get high when we find out what actually happened. That's going to feel like a high to us, right? That's going to be that natural rush that we feel when we've actually solved what happened to Charlie Kirk.
Candace Owens just slammed Turning Point USA for continuing to lie about Charlie Kirk. This after Turning Point USA produced some information, some explanation, let's call it, for his chief of staff, Mikey McCoy's reaction to the murder within a second of it happening, either placing, taking, or continuing a call. Why Candace doesn't think that this argument's plausible, let's take a look. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Okay, let's jump in here to TPUSA's response to the Mikey McCoy. Actually, it wasn't really a response because, to be fair, they did their episode before my episode went out. Charlie Kirk's show is before my show is. But it was their response to the Mikey McCoy video going viral. So not a response to me, but rather a response to the people who had pulled this out, who had discovered this over the weekend. So like James Lee, Ian Carroll, Sam Parker. And here is what Andrew Colvett had to say. He's going to tell us that Mikey was told to do this in the event of this type of an emergency by, you guessed it, Charlie Kirk. Take a listen.
Here's the last thing I want to make a point of. And Charlie, because Charlie had given me similar instructions along the years, said if anything ever happens to me, you call Erica.
Yeah,
that's the other thing. And he drilled that into Mikey's brain so that when this moment of trauma happened, that he turned around and he knew he had to do it. And by the way, I just last thing, because this is part of the video allegations here, is that they think they're alleging that he was on the phone immediately. He was not. He was taking social videos, which he would send to our group chat, which we would then put on Charlie's social while the event was happening, so you could see like the crowd come in or his interactions. And we were only 2 questions into this event, so he was still getting it out to all the chats he needed to do, which he did at every event. He turns around, and it was so blaringly loud, I'm told. You would know this better than I, but this is what I'm told. It was so blaringly loud, and he was so shell-shocked. He put his fingers in his ear, but his phone was still in his hand. He walks away, and he's...
not even walk. I want to, because people are talking about that. The way it was is we had a cordoned off area with grates, so you had controlled access. All the people, when this happens, they all get the idea we should leave before we are shot. And so there's a little narrow gap that I think... people, it's not really walking, it's that everyone has to slow up to get through this little narrow choke point to get out of the area.
Okay, elsewhere they say that, so basically he wasn't on the phone, he was holding his ears, okay? And then once he got out into the distance beyond the car that Charlie would be carried into is when he called Erica first and then his father. That's what they tell us. Now, in regards to him saying that Mikey was taking social videos, I can tell you, it tracks that Mikey would be taking videos behind, like we know when Charlie first comes out of the event, he's throwing hats. That tracks. That absolutely is a thing at Turning Point USA. You follow the person to get behind the scenes. I would have Savannah do this before Mikey McCoy did this. It was Sarah Schmachtenberger. And they do that. They like the behind the scenes reactions. But in this particular video, he's not standing where you can get a view of Charlie asking a question.
Yeah, I think she's right about that. He wouldn't be doing that. It doesn't seem like from the footage that he was pointing his camera in that direction. He did seem to be pointing it out to the crowds, though, at certain points, or at least holding the phone up and touching the phone in those moments. And if he was taking pictures of the crowds, that might be a plausible explanation here. Now, I'm a little bit surprised Candace didn't show, well, we'll see what else she shows, but there was a time in this clip, I watched this entire clip from Turning Point USA, where Andrew Kovlet says that, Mikey McCoy doesn't actually remember exactly what transpired in those moments after Charlie Kirk's death, but it was actually him, Andrew Kovlet, that actually observed him calling Erica Kirk and then calling Rob McCoy. But again, we don't really have Mikey's explanation for it. He doesn't owe that to us. He's not guilty of a crime. He's not alleged to have committed a crime. Doesn't seem like the FBI cared to talk to him, despite Kash Patel's, insistence that they were going to explore every angle of this. But he could allay, these kind of criticisms by showing the timestamps within his phone if he wanted to. Again, he's not under that obligation, but he could do that lest, these, if they're going to call it conspiracy theories, get, out of control. And and that is the risk you run by this guy not responding personally.
So this part is not tracking. Okay, Mikey is not standing to the side of Charlie. He is behind. And so if you're saying what earlier, we're supposed to see him, the best place to stand if you're going to get a video of Charlie asking a question is going to be in a place where you can see both Charlie and the person asking the question. And
also, I'll note that there are other people running behind that tent, running quicker than Mike McCoy walks away. Now, I'm not saying that's indicative of necessarily suspicion, but it also throws a wrench into what this guy on Turning Point USA was saying, where, you know, you had to slow down to get through this choke point. Well, other people were actually running. And I'm not even saying that multiple people wouldn't behave differently in this sort of situation, but that is the case. It seems like other people were able to run through that corridor at this time. You do see right after the gunshot, he does put both of his fingers up by his ears. You can see that it's not just one, which you would need to place a call if you're going to do it manually. Like I talked about in the video yesterday, he could have done that verbally through Siri or Google Assistant. A lot of people criticize that, saying there's no way with that level of noise that could happen, but that's not true. You can test this with your own phone in a loud car or at a rock concert. Siri uses machine learning and audio processing actually to filter out background noise, and you can place calls verbally. That's not necessarily saying that's what he did. If you're following the Covalet line of reasoning here, he just did that temporarily and then later placed those calls.
That's just not where he's standing. So that excuse doesn't make sense to me. Now, maybe he's saying Mikey was there when he was throwing hats out, and he was there trying to send videos thereafter once things got started. That's all possible. I don't know. Regarding him putting his hands up to his ear, it does sound completely plausible to me that if you first hear a gunshot, you're going to naturally do this, right? That kind of makes sense. You're going to go, what was that maybe? And then I think typically you'd get down. And the issue that I have is I never see him take that phone down. Maybe he does, right? Maybe he does. We don't know for a fact. And so we should be clear that it doesn't look to me like he's just covering his ears there, but maybe he is.
Yeah, credit to Candace for saying maybe he is. I don't know what would look different if you're not, holding your ears there, or if you only see one of his hands when he's behind the tent there. It's hard to completely see, but I don't know what the difference would be is if he's doing that or not. You can't see what that right arm is doing as he walks away. You can see what that right arm is doing when he's, just to the side of the tent. That initial reaction is to put both of them up there. But hey, credit to Candace for at least acknowledging, hey, there might be a plausible explanation here. But again, we're not given the call logs or anything like that, and we're not privy to them. We're not obligated to have them, but you can see why people are focusing on this, because it does seem like, if you put your phone up right away, a lot of people might suspect, hey, you're on a call or something like that. And, this is a plausible explanation, but it certainly doesn't answer the words of his father, Rob McCoy, who said that his son, Mike McCoy, was drenched in blood also. That's very odd, too. We talked about it yesterday.
What I will say is that it would be unlikely that you would keep holding your ears until you get all the way out, and that you wouldn't duck down. And regarding, Charlie always told us to call Erica if anything happens. Yeah, that's kind of common sense. That's not exactly like, hey, if I get shot in the throat, don't help me and call Erica. I think obviously that's called like first of kin, right? First of kin. If something happens to me, call George. If something happens to George, call Candace. That is almost in the sphere of common sense.
Yeah, totally agree with her on that. It's in the sphere of common sense, and you would default to maybe that attitude probably, but that doesn't mean that Charlie didn't say to do that to Andrew or Mike in the event that something happened to him. I can see someone saying, hey, make sure my wife knows if I'm in a tragic situation, a serious situation, a violent situation. You can understand how that might be said and also be common sense. I don't think that, takes away or detracts from that sentiment or that viewpoint. And also she says, I think you would duck. I think that's just projection of what she might do. And some people that you see running behind the tent do kind of duck down a little bit as they're quickly running. Some people don't, though. So are the people that didn't duck all now suspect of being implicated in this crime or some connection to it or behaving suspiciously? Because there were more people that didn't duck, even in that footage that they showed us, than Mikey McCoy. So I'm just saying that some of this stuff, we're projecting what we think we would do and being suspicious if people don't behave in that way, but it seems like it's focused on Mike McCoy when many other people didn't duck.
So I believe that. I don't believe that Charlie said, if I get shot, don't help me, calmly walk away and call Erica first. Like, I think, yeah, I don't know. Like I said, we have nothing to go off of. I think it's curious that we're hearing this from Andrew and we're not hearing it from Mikey McCoy. It's very easy to dispel any internet innuendo. You don't actually have to jump into ad hominem attacks. The first thing I would have done, just like I did when I was being accused of colluding on the Blake Lively story, when I got drafted into that lawsuit and they thought that I was working with Blake Lively's, working with Justin Baldoni's team, is I quite literally live subpoenaed myself. I held up my phone, I typed in Blake Lively, and I showed you the only 2 times that I had ever texted about her in my phone at all, to demonstrate that there was no collusion happening and no one compelled me to speak. It was a ridiculous thing for her to say. I laughed at it. I wasn't upset about it, right? And I said, this is crazy. Here is my phone. I'm live opening it for you. Why not do that? Doesn't that seem easier? The easier thing, if you feel that pressure, is to just say, I'm going to dispel this. It's kind of like the Brigitte Macron thing. Hey, here's a couple of pictures of me raising my kids. 30 years was missing because I really was just camera shy. I'm just going to show you the pictures. It's so much easier, rather than fighting a tit for tat war, to just share the truth. People are uncomfortable.
Yeah, I generally agree with this. That would be generally my mindset. However, again, other people don't necessarily have this mindset. A lot of other people cling to their privacy in ways that I don't even fully understand. You know, I'm a public figure, so to speak, now. I have so many videos and there's so much information on my thoughts. It would be hard for me to conceal this. Candace is the same way. Her life is on full display on her show, other content creators as well. But some people don't necessarily want that kind of spotlight, even if you're a chief of staff of sorts. So at least there's a plausible explanation as to why you wouldn't want to divulge this. You could also think that, hey, if I divulge this, no matter what I do, they're going to say my response to this is suspect. And it's going to be even deeper in the conspiracies looking my way, even though I'm innocent. Again, just another plausible reading of what could be the case or could be the mind frame of someone that doesn't share this. Now, I'm not saying he shouldn't share this. I think that it might behoove him and, you know, anyone else involved in this in particular to share this information. I would tend to be more forthcoming about that information, but at the same time, I can see some plausible reasonings why people might not want to.
It's going to get even more interesting, though, because Alex Marlow, who runs Breitbart News, was their guest for the day on the show. And he then kind of shifts gears and pretends like we're all drug addicts, right? We're just high on conspiracy theory. Take a listen.
There's a suggestion online that Mikey, Charlie's chief of staff, one of the most sincere people you'd ever meet, brilliant, Christian, kind, everyone he ever met in his entire life, couldn't hurt a fly, was part of a conspiracy to murder Charlie. That's what's going on.
Yeah.
It's vile. It's utterly vile.
Who would do this? What type of individual? Just to create content, do we think, or is there some? What's the ulterior?
I don't know. I think a lot of this mindset just sort of fuels itself. It's sort of addictive in the same way a lot of social media stuff is addictive, or in the way like honestly something like pornography is addictive or something. Like they get really they almost get a high off of like the idea of like that they're doing something that's daring or out there.
So that right there is a psychological operation. And because we're reading about Sigmund Freud, they diagnose you. When they don't want you to look into something, they diagnose you. So right there, he's going, oh my, are they just doing this to create content? Are these people akin to drug addicts? They're just high on the conspiracy theory. They're gaslighting you, and then they're diagnosing you. So
Totally agree with her on this. It's the same line of reasoning that the regime, establishment, government does when they just call you an extremist, that nothing you say is worthy of consideration or argument because I just called you an extremist, in this case, diagnosing you of being some kooky conspiracy theorist, that it's addicted to, you know, the spotlight that comes from this, like it's a porn addiction or something, to explore every avenue of this because people are untrustworthy for good reason of the FBI narrative on this stuff, of, you know, their story of events, the timeline, the George Zinn connection. Things that just don't add up. It's only the FBI's fault. And I noticed that this line of reasoning, it's rarely from any kind of establishment, operation, or institution ever levied toward the FBI, that the FBI, you know, gets off on, you know, completely gaslighting the public, not being forthcoming about information that they have, even though we know that they have it, you know, not clarifying where there are abnormalities and contradictions in their narrative. It's never hoisted at those people. It's always hoisted at people like Candace, who is actually conducting an investigation and trying to search into every crevice here, because the feds clearly aren't doing that. They already have their narrative, it seems. So yeah, I'm with Candace on this completely. And again, I don't always agree with Candace on every avenue of this case, but she's so totally right. They're trying to gaslight and diagnose you such that you just look like a kook, and they just look like, you know, people that, you know, are above all the argumentation and above having to deal with these types of arguments.
We all just watched Charlie die. We are having a perfectly rational response to watching that, and then watching the strange reaction of his peers, or the non-reaction of his peers who just want our money, right? And are asking for Susie Wiles. It's the craziest part of his whole thing for me. It was like, why is Susie Wiles? I don't know, it just feels really weird, like a weird pick for her to eulogize him. But yeah, and not maybe his parents, maybe they didn't want to. Actually, they were quite private people. But all this happens, and we're having a natural reaction, which is we feel alarmed, we feel suspicious, and they're going, oh, you're a drug addict. You know what? I get it. You kind of like porn. You're into that. You're into the porn thing. It's, oh, I get it. No, I get it. If you want to watch porn all day, you want to watch porn all day. That, my friends, is a psychological operation. Steel yourselves against this. Yes, we are asking questions. No, we are not akin to people that watch pornography all day. And no, we're not getting high on it. We're going to get high when we find out what actually happened. That's going to feel like a high to us, right? That's going to be that natural rush that we feel when we've actually solved what happened to Charlie Kirk.
Right on. Perfect answer, man. I just love how unapologetic Candace Owens is. If you have anything negative to say about her, you can never say that she isn't fearless. She is fearless. You can never say she's a coward. She isn't a coward. You know, she is willing to go through slings and arrows to try to get to the bottom of this thing, even if she doesn't get led to the same necessary conclusions I do. I find that admirable. I really do find that admirable, especially because of how close she was to Charlie, and how, you know, she wants to vindicate, you know, this operation and this investigation by searching for the truth, when we know that we won't get it from the feds. We know that we won't get it from the FBI, the same institution that is covering up actively a child sex trafficking operation that likely took place as a foreign blackmail operation by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. You know, that same entity that, you know, entrap people into trying to, you know, nail them for a Whitmer kidnapping plot for January 6th, trying to undermine a sitting president in Russiagate, even while he was funding Ukraine and withdrawing from the INF and denouncing Russia for 2 to 3 years. We were captivated by that, by the same institution that wiretapped dissidents like Stokely Carmichael and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, and murdered Fred Hampton and tried to, you know, convince Martin Luther King to commit suicide, engage in warrantless wiretapping, shredding the Fourth Amendment, has this FBI time and time again. And you have Kash Patel there, who kind of in campaigning for the position in 2024 said, hey, if I run the FBI, what I'd do is shut down the Hoover building and set up a museum to the deep state in its place. Well, we're still waiting for that museum. We'd love to see the Hoover building come down, Kash. But, you know, I got off on a tangent, but I really admire Candace Owens for her unapologetic attitude here when she's being attacked by all circles. She deserves to be able to conduct whatever investigation she wants. People will have the opportunity to rip her for that, but you can't blame her. If you want to blame someone for this investigation and things you might not necessarily agree with that come up in the process of this investigation, look no further than the feds, because no one trusts the FBI after everything that's happened in its weaponization of the state against dissidents, which will continue, by the way. Under Trump, it's continuing. Under Biden, it continued. Obama, Bush, all the way to its advent, it has continued. Ever since J. Edgar Hoover spearheaded that operation, we're left with the same criminal organization that we can't trust. So you can't trust the FBI, you can't trust police in many states, and that's the case too. You know, law enforcement is not usually your friend. They're going to pervert your liberty any way they can in many opportunities. This is what the natural conclusion is, and this is a product of the new independent media that will rise to displace the legacy media, which no one trusts either. So when you don't trust state institutions, especially federal institutions, and the legacy media, that's when you're going to get this kind of investigation. And I'm with Candace on that, even though I don't always agree with her. I don't even agree with the fact that Tyler Robinson is a patsy. I just don't. I think he was involved in some way. I don't think you can get around that unless you can prove that the text messages were false. And the defense is going to have subpoena power. They're going to have every opportunity to prove they're false. And I've had no indication that they're going to do that. The moment they do that, my eyebrow raises. Because even if you took away all the other evidence in the case that the state has, they've talked about, included in the indictment documents, etc., away, those text messages are damning. And if the defense can't deal with it, this guy's going to walk. Maybe that'll happen. But almost every piece of this crime is inherent in those text messages, and that's what led some people to say, hey, they can't be right then. Well, let's see what the defense does, because if his defense counsel doesn't deal with this either, it can be dismissed, and that's an easy way to walk too, because of ineffective counsel. I just don't think it's going to happen in this case. I'd be surprised if it goes to trial. But just an example where I don't agree with Candace, but at the same time, I can see why her investigation's valuable. And, you know, screw the haters of it. I'm Team Candace as far as trying to explore every avenue of this. And what do you think, though? Let me know in the comments down below. Do you agree with me on this? Do you disagree? What do you think is interesting about this? Do you think their explanation at Turning Point is plausible about this? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Candace Owens also. Really appreciate her. If you like this video, please consider becoming a YouTube member. You can do that by clicking the join button below to become a member. I really appreciate your support if you go to that link to support me. And in return, I will give you access to all of my videos, the members only ones, before they go live to the general public. Also, if you want a free copy of my first book, Compact of the Republic, click the link in the description below. That tells the story of how the United States government went from a decentralized constitutional republic into a centralized world empire with institutions like the criminal FBI guiding our policy from a deep state bureaucracy that we don't really have control over. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.